Welcome to Forbes Newsroom. Joining me now is Rob LaFranco, Assistant Managing Editor here at Forbes. Rob, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here, Brittany.
Great. So, Rob, it really does feel like 2009 right now in the entertainment space. The top entertainment headlines this week included Kanye West and Taylor Swift. I do want to start with Kanye West. So he's been embroiled in a ton of controversy in recent weeks. Can you expand on that?
Embroiled is a pretty good word for Kanye. He's a tough one to keep track of. He's gotten himself into some pretty hot water here. He, as a musician, does not make most of his money from music. In fact, as we know, the Donda album was not really a big hit for him, and it came out with a lot of fanfare. When we had him at a billionaire, which was before Adidas dropped him, it was primarily based on the revenue he was getting from Adidas sneakers every year. And the first crack came from when he had his spat with The Gap. And now The Gap had just started, but it sold well, but the royalties hadn't started coming in. The real money was with Adidas, but once he started going on the anti-Semitism and doing the rants that people just couldn't stomach, it was time for the sneaker company to finally call it. And people were asking them to call it for a while. So
some brands did drop Kanye, but his music is still on Spotify. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, I guess Spotify is sort of a different beast in that it's a distributor. And it's probably got a little bit, maybe a lot to do with Universal Music, which is the company that owns most of the recordings that Kanye has done. And as you know, his earliest stuff and the stuff he did with Jay-Z, it's super popular. It sold really well. Spotify without Kanye, it's tough. I mean, Spotify was without Prince for a while. They now have Prince, right? There's only, if you're a music distributor, you can't not have Kanye West. So it's not really a brand that is associated with Kanye West because it's got everybody on it as music. But if you're Adidas or you're The Gap and you're selling products that's branded Kanye, well, that's a direct connection. So that becomes a hot potato that nobody wants to touch.
Yeah, and that Adidas dropping him made him leave the Forbes Billionaires List. So is this type of self-induced downfall precedented?
It's not precedent. It's he shares many similarities with Donald Trump, and that's one of them. He didn't actually leave the list. We kicked him out. He's wanted to be on the list many, many times. And when we did put him on the list at $1 billion, he insisted it was triple that. And then when we upped the fortune, basically based on the way we did it was we look at the revenue stream that he was collecting from Adidas, which was somewhere $200 million. It varied from year to year, and it was continually escalating. But it was hundreds of millions of dollars a year in the bank. And that's when it's a reliable revenue stream, can be sold off. Many entertainers, many athletes, lots of people sell off. It's basically an annuity. And we applied that multiple that market experts said this would sell for. There's a risk with that. And the risk is the person who's behind it goes a little nuts or becomes a product or a brand or a personality that nobody wants to do business with. And that's exactly what happened. So had he not gotten into hot water with what he was saying, that revenue would have continued.
Is there any coming back for Kanye, do you think?
That's up to him, and he has proven to be very unpredictable. There is fans will always forgive. Big Kanye fans never left him, right? But if he were to come out with another album like, say, College Dropout, that is just, you got to hear it. It's playing in the clubs. Everybody's playing it. You hear it on the streets. Yeah. And if he tones it down a little bit, yeah, of course he could come back. Again, he's not making a ton of money from his music because his music is not as good as it used to be. As a brand, as someone who is sponsored, that's a much steeper hill to climb.
Do you think he's set to lose any more sponsorships?
I don't know that there's many more to lose, but he's certainly not going to pick any up. Let's put it that way. The big ones are gone, and the big ones were The Gap and Adidas, and they're gone, and they ain't coming back.
And this was a huge financial blow for him. Is there anything else financially that he could lose?
Well, he could, and I believe his record deal, it's kind of unclear whether it had actually ended with Universal or it is ending or Universal didn't renew it. But he would then have to sell his music independently if he were to do that, if a record company doesn't want to touch him, let's say. Now, he can do that. It's a lot easier to do that now than it was in the days of vinyl or CDs. You don't need to get your stuff in record stores. You just put it online. But he could lose that. People could leave him in droves as fans of his music if they find what he says so distasteful. And then there's, tens of millions of dollars that come in every year from his publishing royalties and recording royalties. That would dry up. But that's unlikely. I mean, a guy like Kanye, no matter what he does, because of what he's done in the past, is going to be making a couple $1 million a year. Plus, he still owns 5% of his ex-wife's clothing company. So that's got value. And he's got the ranch in Wyoming, and he's got real estate. So there's, Kanye will always be rich.
Okay, but he is one of the most unpredictable figures in modern history. So what do you think's next for him?
I think he's going to continue acting erratically, is my feeling. I think he will put out more music. It's really a question of whether that music will be good or not. So it's kind of hard to say whether his trajectory is completely downward sloping. He could turn it around with an incredible album, and he's got the talent. He is a genius producer. I just see a lot more chaos coming out of the house of Kanye.
And do you think he could independently release a sneaker line, a clothing line, something like that?
He could, and that was one of the disputes we had with him. He valued his fortune at the high mark for, saying, I recall, something around $7 billion when we were, $1.5 billion or so. And he valued the rights that he holds, which is the design rights. Now, Adidas owns the rights to the sneakers they produced, but he owns the rights to the name and all of that. So, yes, he can go to, let's say, a Chinese manufacturer and say, here's 10 designs. I want you to make these shoes and how much. Yes, he could do that. So he's got options. He's got options. It's a question of whether he will find partners to monetize those options.